Well, I think generally everyone, including the critics, agree that the speech was well crafted and also well presented. I mean, clearly Marcos had multiple audiences in mind, including the international audience. Usually, Filipino presidents tend to use more, at least recent presidents used to use more vernacular or Filipino, but in this case, we saw a lot of usage of English, kind of sophisticated prose. There were a lot of dignitaries, including Chinese Vice President Wang Qishan and some of the top officials from other countries there. So he was trying to impress, I think, a lot of people on different levels. But at the same time, he was speaking from two sides of his mouth. I mean, on one hand, he was saying, we don't want to dwell on the past. We don't want to focus on divisive issues. We want to move forward. Judge me by my action, not necessarily what my father did. And yet later on in the speech, he's squeezing in this praises for his father, who supposedly built more infrastructure than everyone, brought more prosperity than everyone. But this has been really the story of Marcos Jr.'s presidency. On one hand, he projects this new image of the Marcos as cool, almost kind of a BTS-like figure with his bomber jackets and V-cut shirts. At the same time, he talks about his father and the strongman leader and someone who brought prosperity to the country. And we saw him trying to have the cake and eat it too again today in his inauguration speech.
Who are his supporters who gave him a massive lead in this election? Why is he so popular?
Yeah, I mean, he owes a lot of his presidency to the Dutertes, right? Had someone like President Duterte or former President Duterte not been in power, I don't think Marcos could have come back with such force, right? On one hand, former President Duterte was so effective in undermining the foundations of Philippines' liberal democracy, in denigrating the liberal opposition. So it became very difficult for the liberal opposition to really mount a comeback in these elections. But as important is the fact that presidential daughter, Sara Duterte, who's now the new vice president, decided not to contest the presidency, but instead team up with Marcos Jr. So once the two houses, the Marcoses from the north and the Dutertes from the south teamed up, that was an unbeatable team. And hence the 58% to 60% majority vote that Marcos got, which, by the way, is the highest since his father in 1969.
How will this administration differ from the Duterte government?
There will definitely be points of continuity and discontinuity. I mean, one of the things that was interesting with his speech was he was very careful not to openly criticize Duterte because he knows he needs their support. He knows he partly owes his presidency to Duterte's. But there were times that he indirectly said there was some element of mismanagement in response to the pandemic, that certain things could be improved, and that's where his presidency comes in. I think there'll be continuity in terms of reliance on, let's say, alternative media, including bloggers, right? A lot of them who don't follow journalistic ethics. I don't expect that the friendship with China that was built under President Duterte will go away. But I think there could be also some discontinuities for the good. For instance, I think Marcos Jr. will be much more calibrated in terms of foreign relations. He has extended the olive branch to America. I think he's going to visit the White House in not so distant future. Not to mention Australia probably again, but this time in official capacity. I think on the drug war, we're going to see a reduction in extrajudicial killings, more focus on public health, and a much more surgical approach. So I think there will be some points of continuities and discontinuities, but it remains to be seen which one will be more dominant in the coming months and years.
Meanwhile, in his last 2 days in office, Rodrigo Duterte moved to shut down news outlet Rappler, run by Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa.
Yes, I mean, the Duterte administration perhaps didn't want to leave anything to imagination, right? I mean, just before stepping down, they made some final hurrah. And clearly the media has been under siege in the Philippines. Anyone who dares to speak their political conscience has been facing harassment. All of us been facing death threats, harassment and all. But in fairness to the Philippine media and journalists, they have proven very resilient and strong. And let's see how they're going to cope with this new administration, which on the surface has more finesse and more calibrated approach to its critics and allies alike.
Do you think press freedom will increase under Ferdinand Marcos Jr. or perhaps get worse?
I think much will depend on, for instance, how the West will engage the Marcos administration. I think Marcos Jr. wants to show that he's different from his father, at least to the international community. He's a product of Western culture. He wants to visit Western countries. I think that's something that they have to keep in mind. But it also depends on the resistance. I think if the civil society, the opposition, which got 15 million votes, if they get their act together, have the leadership, fight their cause in the courts, on the streets, then perhaps Marcos Jr. could be much more open to press freedom than his predecessors. But the bar is just so low.
Richard Haydaran, good to get your thoughts. Thanks so much.
Pleasure.